Okay, so let's talk about how the rest of Europe started to industrialize. And like we were talking about before, one of the major reasons why the rest of continental Europe is lagging behind is because they're distracted by wars, most notably the Napoleonic Wars. So it's no surprise that continental Europe starts to industrialize after 1815 or so. Once the wars are over, they're able to start to catch up with Great Britain. Um, but going a little bit deeper, it's not just the wars themselves, but it's also some of the indirect effects that the war has on continental Europe. Um, so, for example, you're going to see that, especially when France is at war with England, for example, you're not going to be able to have any sort of access to any kind of British machinery that was being produced. Um, you're also going to have England kind of dominate the world markets during the wars, especially due to the continental system. Most of continental Europe is going to be blocked off from a greater global trade network. So England is going to be able to kind of take advantage of that. Also, it goes without saying that England and France are enemies during the Napoleonic Wars. So because of that, they're really not communicating, and that means that they're not exchanging any ideas about any kind of technological changes, any kind of innovations. So they're just not sharing information. Um, and what happens is once they start to lag behind, at first it's going to be difficult to catch up, partly because the technology that is developed in England is going to be seen as too advanced by continental European countries. They look at some of the inventions that Britain is producing and they don't understand how they work. Um, Also, when steam power is introduced to greater continental Europe, at first they can't afford to introduce it to their countries, right? England had the capital to invest in steam. So, because of, again, because of war, because most of these countries in continental Europe are lacking the kind of capital that England has, they're not going to be able to put forward the kind of money to invest in things like steam power. So it's just too expensive. You're also going to see, partly because there were many more casualties as a result of war, also because the agricultural revolution lagged behind in other countries, there aren't going to be as many laborers available in continental Europe. So you can't have things like railroads, you can't have a growing textile industry if you don't actually have the labor to put into it. Also, at first, you're not going to see the government kind of coming in to assist these countries in continental Europe to develop these new industrial economies. That will come later, though. So eventually, especially with Germany, we'll talk about how the government will come in and try to assist industrialization eventually. So once industrialization does start to get introduced to continental Europe, in some ways there is an advantage to coming in second, so to speak. The early mistakes that England made, these countries in continental Europe are going to be able to prevent. So basically, they're studying the way that England industrializes, and anything that England did wrong, they avoided. Also, countries in continental Europe did have a pretty rich putting out system already. So because the putting out system is pretty developed, they have a lot of merchants, they have a lot of urban artisans, and their economy is pretty adaptable. So because of that, eventually you are going to see that they can kind of translate that putting out system into a much greater centralized factory industry. So instead of producing things in the home, they're just going to put it in a central place, in a factory. And eventually you're going to see that they're going to be able to take the technology that was developed in Britain and they're going to be able to borrow it, so to speak. But this is more difficult than you might think, because England is trying to really prevent any of its technological information from leaking out to other countries. So we're going to talk about how that eventually happens anyway in a little while. Also, you're going to see that as time goes on, some governments are going to help aid their countries in developing their economies further. So you will see certain countries help, for example, promote industries, maybe regulate production, issue tariffs, and again, we're going to see that happen particularly in Germany in the future. But all of these countries in greater continental Europe kind of have their own unique timeline for industrialization, and it kind of makes sense if you think about geography. You're going to think about countries that are further west industrializing first. So after 1815, so immediately after the Napoleonic Wars, you're going to see Belgium, the Netherlands, and France start to industrialize. Then we'll move farther east. So Germany, Austria, and Italy are going to follow and start to industrialize in the mid 19th century. All right, and also you're going to see that these areas are going to become more politically unified by the mid 19th century as well. And Russia, of course, is going to lag behind. It will not start industrializing until the end of the 19th century or so. And so once we get there, we'll think about the way in which countries like Russia and Germany might kind of need to rush in order to catch up with Western Europe. Okay, so how do these countries in continental Europe industrialize? One of the major ways is that they get information leaked from England. Some of the things that England is already doing, they are going to figure out ways that they can use England's technological innovations, for example. And again, this is sort of easier said than done. Right, because for a while, up until the 1840s or so, England actually had laws that prevented um, British technicians, people who were working in these factories from emigrating because they did not want them to introduce information about these British forms of technology to other countries. Right, so some of these early kind of introductions of British technology were not legal. But nonetheless, they happen. So we're going to see in Belgium, a man named John Cockerill is going to figure out some industrial information. He's going to figure out how to build plants, different types of machinery, steam engines, and also locomotives. And he's going to introduce those into Belgium. We're also going to see a man named Fritz Harcourt introduce some elements of British industry into Germany. Um, so eventually, as time goes on, of course, it's impossible to completely block off English information from spreading not only to continental Europe but also to the United States. We're going to see that Britain is unable to kind of maintain a monopoly on technological advances. Also, as time goes on, you're going to see that governments in Central Europe are going to try to encourage industrialization. And they're going to do this by issuing protective tariffs. They're also going to spend money to do things like develop their transportation, build roads, canals, railroads. And so there are a few countries that are more noteworthy than others. Belgium is going to actually facilitate the construction of railroads. They're actually going to build state-owned railroads. So it's going to be much easier for um, for people to invest in independent expenditures rather than actually spend privately owned money on the railroad. Since the state owns the railroad, that is one thing that individual investors don't have to worry about. Um, so because of the state-owned railroad, this is going to allow, again, um, individual investments to be made much more easily. You're going to see in Prussia, their government is also going to invest in the interest on railroad bonds. So basically, this means that independent investors, if they want to buy a bond to help build a railroad, if Prussia is covering the interest, this is going to lower the risk um, that they would be involved in for investing in the railroads. So this is huge. Um, you're also going to see in Germany, in particular, this interesting tariff union is going to be introduced. It's called the Zollverein. Now, this is going to be kind of a economic organization of these German states. We know that that there was some loose organization of Germany, both under Napoleon and under the Congress of Europe. But the Zollverein is kind of this attempt to unify Germany economically. And so what it is, it's a tariff union, which means all the countries within the Zollverein uh, do not have to do not pay tariffs on goods that are exchanged within the Zollverein. They only have to pay tariffs on non-German imports, right? So basically, it increases the incentive to buy things from within Germany. It also creates free trading zones among member states within the Zollverein. So again, just because these countries are not unified politically does not mean that economically they can't trade freely with one another. Again, uniform tariffs levied against foreign countries, so encouraging the economy to develop within. And this is an example of economic nationalism. So even though you don't see Germany completely unifying politically, you are going to see some significant attempts at economic unification, which is going to help Germany industrialize. You're also going to see that in parts of continental Europe, the banks are going to increasingly encourage industrialization. In Belgium, for example, you're going to see that banks are actually going to help develop industries, and what they're doing then is making it so that individual investors have less liability, right? They are not actually using their own capital to develop industries. Instead, the banks themselves are putting in money for industrial development. So again, just like how Prussia was investing on interest on railroad bonds, which makes a lower risk for individual investors. If in Belgium the banks are actually investing in industry, individuals don't have to. Um, so this is going to the creation of these industrial banks in Belgium is going to dramatically decrease liability for individual investors. Also, you're going to see this system in France called the Credit Mobilier of Paris, which basically combines the investments of thousands of individuals to do things make much greater projects like build railroads and invest in other industries. So by taking the money of many different people and putting them together, they can invest in much greater things, which was um, much more efficient than a number of separate individuals trying to invest in different forms of industry. So in general, what we're seeing here in continental Europe is that there are a combined number of efforts that allow industry in continental Europe to grow pretty rapidly. So in between 1850 and 1873, and there's going to be a financial crash in 1873, which is why it's that year, you're going to see some pretty rapid industrial growth in Central Europe. And next time we will talk about how this impacts European society.